Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode on season three of the Part of the Pros podcast. For those just tuning in, this is a sports business podcast where I'm fortunate enough to sit down with some of the best and most talented execs in the industry. We talk through industry topics, their journey into sports, and the pathway to success. Today, I'm sat with Nancy Elder, the Chief Communications Officer at the New York Mets, and a good friend, I might add. Nancy, thanks for joining the podcast.
Really happy to be here, Samir. I know we've been trying to do this, so ready to get going.
Glad we finally able to get it done. Nancy, a question I love to kick these things off with. Take us, I guess, to your time of your career when you first got an idea of, the sports and entertainment industry. And for those tuning in, we'll dive into things in a bit more detail, but you haven't quite had the traditional pathway into sports, which I'm really excited to get into.
No, I'm definitely not the traditional path from a career perspective in sports in general, and definitely not for a team sport. But it's actually kind of funny. It started out with one of my first jobs out of college. I was at a PR firm here in New York, and I was working on, your pretty basic consumer business like Hasbro toys and McDonald's, things like that. But I'm a huge sports fan. So I had volunteered one fall with our sports practice to work on the weekend in the press center during the Virginia Slims tennis tournament, which was a pretty innovative tournament around women's tennis. It's now the Chase tournament. And my job, because I was a volunteer in the media center, was to replenish the cigarettes that were laid out for the media. So that was kind of my first foray into sports. It's probably not a role that anybody would have today, but it gave me a taste for big events, for what it's like working with the press. I loved what I did there, but my career kind of veered more significantly into brand strategy and corporate communications for big companies that usually had something to do with sports as a sponsor. And at JetBlue, we had the Patriots and the Red Sox as part of our sponsorship, but it was always a smaller part of my job. And as a corporate sponsor, which is a very different role. It wasn't until I started at DAZN, the sports streaming platform, where I was focused exclusively on sport. And as you said, it was sports media versus sports as a team.
Yeah. I think there's that transition which I'm intrigued to learn more about in a moment. But the Mastercard working on World Cups, you're at Time Warner for a while as well. Those businesses are very consumer focused, right? They're customer focused, and there is a very close kind of connection between a consumer and a fan, and you can argue that they're two in the same. But how did you kind of find that transition going from an environment where you are focused on the consumer, which is very similar to focusing on the fan, or in DAZN's terms, I guess consumers still, but fans of the respective sport that they're watching. How did you kind of find that initial transition? Was it, more of the same? This is what I've done before, and I'm confident that this is what works, or was there a bit of an element of I'm going to have to adapt here slightly, and I'm maybe going to need to take a step back before I can really take a big jump forward?
Yeah, I think there's a through line in all of them, whether you're doing brand strategy or communications at a big consumer brand, which is how are you engaging with your audience, with your consumer, with the fan, fill in the blank, and how do you get more, to be doing the same thing? So that's like a very rudimentarily, fundamentally consistent thing from organization to organization, whether that's, get more people to engage with your partnership at Mastercard, with Citibank, because you have the World Cup, on through to JetBlue, which is like, how do you take a very active, passionate customer and increase your customers? How do you expand your customer base on the foundation of that kind of fandom to begin with? So while it's a kind of a unique way for me to have gotten to the Mets, I think about these roles as, what is the common denominator that you're after? And then what are the unique aspects to it? And this one is definitely unique because the fans are so incredibly passionate. You know, we're connected with them all the time. I have to say it's akin at DAZN to, you know, someone being, you know, a very, very passionate football fan, soccer, because you don't experience that quite as much in a consumer brand. You know, I know people like their credit cards. You know, they're high utility, but I can't say that there's that huge amount of passion for them.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, the passion would come as a result of giving fans experiences that they wouldn't be able to have were it not for having a card, like at the World Cup or a PGA event. Um, the level of passion that I'm experiencing here from the fans in a very direct way, it's very unique, and it's a privilege to be working in that space, because we're here for them, period.
Yeah. Were you a baseball fan before you joined the Mets?
Yeah, I grew up in Montreal watching the Expos play. With my dad would take me to the games. My family would go out. My brothers played baseball in high school. I played softball. My mom was a big baseball fan, so I kind of grew up having my own level of fandom around baseball more than almost any other sport. But you know, I tend to watch a lot of sports. I went to the University of Georgia, so a big college football fan. And you know, I wouldn't recommend a team sport job unless you're really a fan. You
Yeah.
know, you're doing it 24/7. And in the case of baseball, you know, it's 162 games with something called the off season, which isn't off season for someone like me. It just means that there aren't players playing here, playing baseball all year. So yeah, you'd have to be really into it.
Did you I speak to a lot of people that at your stage of the career, just for everyone else's context, we're talking about someone here that's been at C-suite level for the past decade. JetBlue Airways is chief communications officer. Mattel was chief communications officer. DAZN is chief communications officer. So a very experienced exec across a variety of industries. Did you find that transition into the Mets, was that something that was, you know, intentional from you? Were you looking to try and get into the sports industry? Because I don't know if you remember this, but this was, you were still at the Zone at the time when we first met for a
Yeah.
coffee. I think it was in the Lower East Side or the East Village. And I remember you saying, I'm really looking to get, you know, I really want to get into the team side. I've had a bit of a flavor of it here at the Zone, and I'm getting that idea that this is a career that I think I can pursue and succeed in.
Yeah, that's really where the germ of that idea started taking root, because you know, I'd gotten the flavor of it as a corporate sponsor, as a partner to a brand, to a team, to a league, for example. Wasn't really that interested in doing that, but it wasn't until DAZN where I really started to understand the business of sports in terms of the relationships with the rights holders, the significance of how the process unfolds with regard to securing rights and broadcast partnerships. I got the partnership side of it from my past experience, but to see how a platform could additionally deepen the fan experience in a couple of different sports sectors. For those watching in the US, you probably wouldn't know DAZN that well unless you were a boxing fan, because that was the major proposition here in the US. But elsewhere throughout Europe, it's soccer. There's baseball in Japan and a few other burgeoning sports. But to watch that level of fandom through the eyes of the sports streaming company, which was set up to really help cord cutting and sort of get to a more direct relationship with the consumer in the direct to consumer space. I also saw the level of fandom from the other side with the team sports, with the leagues, with something like the Women's UEFA Championship League, working on the deal with YouTube there to bring it free to air so that more people around the world could become fans of a very, very competitive women's soccer tournament that just hadn't received the right level of attention. That gave me a very direct experience in what it means to be on the team side without being on the team side. And then I was looking to pivot out of DAZN. I was working with someone in your industry who I just happened to have a call with. And, we were talking about whether I wanted to stay in sports or, pivot back to something more traditionally brand strategy, corp comm for, a publicly held consumer products company. And that's where I started to hone in a little bit more of really being interested in working for a team like this, particularly given our owners. Steve and Alex Cohen are incredibly engaged, very, very innovative owners at a time when they had really had just a couple of years under their belt of taking over the team. And they were looking to bring in someone with a different experience set than the traditional baseball career track. I mean, there's a gentleman, Ethan Wilson, who's on my team, who's been with the Mets for 25 years, his whole career, and has worked in baseball PR the whole time. And there are folks that do that around the league, long, long time, very experienced, amazing communications professionals. The team just happened to be, at the time that I was looking to do something like this, was open to the notion and actually recruiting for someone who didn't necessarily have that traditional baseball experience, but had at least a little bit of a sports adjacent experience, which is pretty much me from a career standpoint, having worked in it, not super directly, a little bit directly, and now very, very directly.
Yeah. Do you think that working in those different sectors beforehand has given you a perspective that is quite unique? Because it's, I don't want to call it a risk, but it's a very bold move as an owner of a team or a president of a business to hire someone that has never worked within that specific, niche area of the industry that you operate in. So to do that, they're trying to achieve something, right? They're trying to do something a little different. That's what that tells me. But it's one thing saying that, and it's another thing when, you've got a short list of 4 or 5 people and you've got 3 people that have all worked team side and they're speaking your language a little better. How would you say that, that was one of your, I guess, advantages in that situation that really, A, helped you land the job in the first place, but B, has really helped you, you've been there for over 2 years now. And from what I hear, it's been a fantastic ride.
It has been a fantastic ride, no regrets at all. But I think, yes, the organization or owner has to be open to that. And more than saying they want it, they actually have to really mean that they want it. I'm usually, because I have worked in so many different industries, I guess a way to categorize me is within a group of 3 or 5 candidates. I'm the alternative candidate.
Yeah.
Because I don't come from that industry. It was probably the most prominent when I went from Time Warner to Marsh McLennan, the business insurance organization. People in business risk insurance. That's an incredibly specialized industry, and it's not a consumer brand. Most people haven't heard of it unless they're on a property and casualty team within a big company or a CFO who manages risks with an organization like that. But when I was interviewing with the CEO, he was like, I have enough of those people. I want someone like you who thinks more broadly about the brand and how it could be more consumer facing, which is why I was brought on board there, albeit briefly, to relaunch the brand. Similarly with JetBlue, when I was interviewing with Robin Hayes, the CEO there were several people on the team who were part of the hiring decision who just had a difficult time. It worked out well, but at the beginning, she's not from airline.
Yeah.
And again, it took a leader like Robin to say, yeah, I know. She's not pretending to be, although she's flown around the world more than some of you here for work. So she gets what we do,
Yeah.
but she isn't a transportation or an airline expert. But, the point being is they want that. And so the occasions that have been the most interesting for me is when an organization wants that. and it doesn't work out all the time, and you kind of figure that out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But when it does, it's a very different experience that happens on a leadership team within the market segments that you're trying to attack or be more engaged with, because the thinking that you bring isn't exclusive to one industry. And I, you know, if somebody, you know, is in high school and goes to college and only ever wants to work for a sports team or directly, very, very directly in sports, you know, have at it. These are amazing careers. But if you have a little bit more curiosity, and have the ability and opportunity to work in a couple of different sectors, I highly recommend it, because you think a little bit differently.
Yeah. I think people talk a lot about diversity, you know, in business, in the work environment. I think diversity from an experience perspective is also super important. Sometimes when we're hiring, it's funny that you mentioned the alternative candidate. It's one thing that I recommend to my team. We always put an alternative candidate in the mix with a shortlist, because it's someone that will provide a different perspective, a fresh lens, a unique point of view that most other people just, you know, naturally won't have, because they've not been in the environments that person has been in. But I do think that's equally as important. And, you know, sometimes it's almost a bit of a domino effect that businesses will make one hire. Nancy's worked out great at the Mets, right? Next time we're hiring a senior marketing person or a senior salesperson, maybe we're a bit more open to looking at people from a different background.
That, in fact, happened, Samir, here. The path was laid for me a little bit because our CMO, Andy Goldberg, who I work day in and day out with, he had come from a different background as well. He was at Amex prior, and he was at GE prior, although we didn't overlap there. So, you know, big brand, big public company, you know, big programmatic experience. And equally with his position, Steve saw a lot of candidates. My position was open quite a while, because, you know, the right person just hadn't come in
Yeah.
and clicked from a chemistry standpoint, and clicked from a, can you go from that to this? Because
Yeah.
it is an incredibly different experience. You know, there's a few hundred people here. You know, I've ran departments that were larger than this. You know, it's a very focused thing. The pace is incredibly demanding. Most of these jobs are, but this in particular, because there's something going on every single day. We're not playing here at Citi Field right now, but we're preparing for the third or fourth in a concert series.
Yeah.
You got to be game for that. But some people can make that transition, and I'm sure there are other cases that, you know, it just ends up not working out. But I think people who want to, owners or, you know, CEOs or leadership teams that really want to make a big transformation or a pivot, they got to try it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like I said, I think it's a bold move. When executed and done well, it can be so fruitful. And that's you know, evidence to see in your case. There's one topic I'd love to kind of dive into today, Nancy. And it's all really geared around the fan. You mentioned yourself, you grew up as a baseball fan when you were a kid, you played baseball, you've gone through that journey of being a fan, sat on, you know, my side of the table, perhaps, to being in the seat that you're sat in now. You know, from going and being entertained to being the person that needs to entertain and you know, show people a good time. How was there's a few things we're going to dive into on this topic, but we'd love to just start things off by understanding, I guess, your perception of how sports fans, you know, have evolved over the course of your career, how that, you know, influences your approach to communications, fan engagement at the Mets, the overall kind of journey that really you've witnessed, and you know, the good, the bad, the ugly, I guess, in there as well, because, you know, not everything's going to be sunshine and daisies, but I think you've obviously gone through an incredible journey to get to where you've got to today, but then having that different perspective is also quite interesting to dive into.
Well, I think so much of what makes someone a sports fan is that it's something for them to engage in, that it's so meaningful in your life when you're a fan, because you may have your work or your family, sometimes they intersect. But it's a diversion, you know, for life. It's a way of being engaged in something that you're truly passionate about. And you know, the reason why I think there's some good symmetry here for me is because I grew up a baseball fan. You know, I watched with my family, listened to it on the radio. Um, when I moved from Montreal to Georgia, I couldn't watch the Expos, but my dad and I would go out and find the sports publications to hear about the scores. But TBS was becoming way bigger sports property then, and I started following the Braves because I had access to it.
Yeah.
You know, then I moved to New York and was watching the New York teams here. But by that time, you know, had become ubiquitous. You weren't constrained with how you could go watch or hear or see a game. And I think that's the biggest shift that I've seen over my life and the decades that I have been working is the accessibility, which has been nothing but beneficial for the teams and the fans because there's so much more direct engagement. You know, I couldn't follow my favorite player, Gary Carter, beyond hearing how, you know, the radio broadcast went or being able to go to a game. You know, I couldn't follow him on social. And so, you know, as we watched all of those platforms evolve, I think one of the biggest benefactors has been the team fan relationship because there's so much direct contact. And then in this particular case, you add to that exceptionally engaged ownership with Alex and Steve. Alex is on Instagram, very direct relationship with the fans there, and Steve equally on Twitter. And you know, you in your words, the good, bad, and the ugly, you know, there's a lot of great things that happen as a result of that. And sometimes there's other things that don't exactly go as planned, but you know, that's part of the experiment of social, if you can even say that we're still in the experiment phase. But I think we are still in the experiment phase for what that means to fans, because they are getting younger. We want to be in front of a younger fan. It's the key there is social. The MLB has made some great progress in making the games shorter. You know, so they've shaved about 20 minutes off, sometimes 30 minutes because of the pitch clock. There's more exciting game being played because the bases are bigger. There's more stealing of bases. But that's a certain fan segment that's either going to come to a game and watch it all or watch it on our broadcast partner, SNY. You know, that's a big chunk of time.
Yeah.
And the rest of our fan base is watching on social or just getting pieces of it or reading it through the media that we're in touch with every day who are here covering the games. But by and large, that segment of the fan base is consuming the content in much more micro doses.
Yeah. I think you completely agree with what you've said in terms of accessibility and the way that people or fans consume sports now is, you know, even to when I was growing up is so different. It's funny. There's still this thing in the UK. So I'm a big Liverpool fan. There's still this thing in the UK. And I can't remember the exact phrase for it, but 3 p.m. kickoffs in the UK on a Saturday, they don't get televised. So if I'm a Liverpool fan, for example, and we're playing a 3 p.m. game against Aston Villa, I can't watch that game on any streaming platform. And the reason behind it is because they're trying to incentivize, you know, fans to go to the games, which I think is still so backwards for today's world and where we're at today. Bearing in mind, I can load up Twitter or within 2 clicks online, I can go and watch an illegal streaming, you know, website and find it. And that this is obviously kind of part of the issue. But it's crazy to think that even in today's world, there are still these, you know, structures in place that don't give fans that easy access.
There's we were obsessed with this at DAZN, trying to figure out how to provide a workaround for fans given the uptick in piracy. But fans, not if they don't have a way of accessing the stream, you know, or getting to participate in it. I mean, that's you're denying
Yeah.
certain percentage, and I would argue a very large percentage of your fan base from even participating. So, then you've got an unfortunate love-hate with the team because they aren't giving you what you want, because of some old construct. Hopefully, there could be some innovation there in that particular case, but I think certainly in the baseball industry, it's a challenge on a couple of fronts. It's not just that, but it's also if you're not that avid fan who's going to sit there for an out 2+ hours to watch a full game, how are we reaching you? And
Yeah.
how can we keep you engaged? And does that make you an avid fan who just doesn't come to games, or is that a casual fan? This is a very unique and challenging, and we love thinking through this kind of consumer segmentation challenge, because there are fans who will never come to Citi Field. They're watching through other means, or maybe they can't even spend the time to watch on SNY or MLB.com, but they're following every word that Joel Sherman at the New York Post says about the team,
Right.
and they know everything about the team. They're just not watching, but they are fans, and you can't tell them they're not fans because they are. They're just a different kind of fan.
You've spoken a couple of times there about kind of fan segments, which I think is in today's world is probably there's probably a wider variety of different kind of segments of fans, level of interest, age, nationality, where you're based in the world, and everything that kind of falls under that world. How do you guys at the Mets, define and segment your fan base? And are there any kind of particular categories or maybe demographics that are most prominent?
Um, yeah, I think in one sense it's a little bit traditional because you've got your avid fans, and they are there watching. You've also got a sub-segment of the avid fan, like we talked about it a minute ago, who isn't necessarily coming or watching all the games, but they are as informed, if not more informed sometimes, because they're reading everything, they understand the analysis, they're listening to talk radio. Then there's a more casual fan who might come, once a year because it's, a kid's birthday. Then there are another segmentation of the casual fan who doesn't come here but is totally tapped in, but less so than the avid. And then there's the baseball fan in general who might not be um, from origin a Mets fan, but who's moved to New York, like you, become a Mets fan, right?
Right, of course, yes. All
Because
thanks.
you have a good time at Citi Field.
Yeah.
Um, but is a more type of casual fan because you're also a sports fan. And then through each of those segments, we also think about the different demographics, which is, and the Mets has a long history with its fan base, sometimes suffering, sometimes elated, but it's a very unique fan psychology that seems to be passed down in generations, dating back to like when the Dodgers left, and the Giants left for the West Coast. So you have families that pass this fandom down from one generation to the next. You have a more transient fan base who's just sort of come to New York and like what we do here at the ballpark. And then you have the families passing it down. You have the kids who are playing sports in the area who become Mets fans. And then you have, a whole different segment beyond the family unit. It's like moms who travel with their kids, to softball leagues or baseball leagues, who live and breathe baseball with their kids every day, who are Mets fans. So we spent a lot of time thinking through, from a communication strategy, how we're reaching each one of those segments through the types of media relations that we do, to the types of podcasts we put out, to the ways we engage with the community, with the players. It's just a never ending, and gratefully so never ending challenge, because our fans are so into being fans. I mean, they're a constant source of information. We can barely keep up with all of their suggestions.
So interesting. I mean, it's something that you expect people are aware of and expects people to know, but I can promise you there are a lot of people that will listen to what you've just said and will not realize the extent of work, the extent of thought, the extent of strategizing that needs to go into how, you know, Jeff, who's a 60-year-old New Yorker and has been a Mets fan all his life and is a season ticket holder, versus 15-year-old Lucy, who's visiting New York for the first time and has always wanted to go to a
Yeah.
Mets game. And
Yeah, I'll tell exactly. And for example, last year when Apple TV first started streaming via their deal, we were one of the first games on Apple TV. And, you know, Larry from Glen Cove, Long Island, who's 75, let us know in no uncertain terms he was not happy that the game was on Apple TV. And let us know about it, let Steve know about it, and that's his prerogative, you know. He finally figured it out.
yeah,
And you know, but that was part of his need for uh thinking through his own tech, you know. But for years it had only ever been on SNY or WPIX here, and Apple wants to be more into sports streaming, and so that's how that happened. But it comes with difficulty for some of the fans, whereas, you know, Lucy, who's 16, you know, that was not a problem for her. You know, she might be a fan persona that plays softball, or somebody in her family, you know, brought her into the whole baseball gig. Her clicking into Apple TV for it, no big deal.
yeah. Two clicks of a button and she's in, right? Which isn't
Yeah.
as easy of a task for
Yeah.
75-year-old Glenn. I mean, the rise of digital media in general has exploded in the past, 10, 15 years. When you then kind of hone in on sports and digital media and how fans now consume content, it is, drastically evolved. Are there kind of specific, I don't know, platforms or types of content that really kind of help you guys to communicate well with all these different fans and segmented fans? Because I think it's one thing just saying, right, guys, we've got 14 to 25-year-old demographic here, and here's the content we're going to push out. We'll do that on a Monday. On a Tuesday, we're going to try and target the 25 to 35-year-olds, and this is what we're going to push out. There's got to be a way to almost communicate with your fans so that anyone who's reading it feels engaged and feels like it's aimed at them. But at the same time, there are obviously different levels as to how you really capture their attention, I can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, we're on all the typical channels, and some work in certain occasions and others work in other occasions. You know, we're more typically like a super avid fan. If they're not able to watch or hear, they would be following along on Twitter because we're doing highlights and big plays and things like that. So it's pretty easy to follow along. SNY will do snippets from our pregame and postgame press conferences. So if you're not able to watch that, you can definitely tap in and hear like the biggest plays, the biggest sound bites from our manager, Carlos Mendoza, and the players that speak after the game. So, those channels work for those types of things. TikTok has, yet another interesting element to it, like the drip report that we do when the players are coming in when they're home. This works on Instagram as well. And we also put it on Twitter, but some of the activations around this thing called the drip report, where we're watching the fashion as they come in, what the players are wearing when they come to the ballpark. It's really popular content.
I've seen it. Yeah.
But nothing to do, right. It's super cool. The players love it. The fans who love it, love it. We didn't quite know what to expect there, but it's been great. And similarly, the more storytelling, and it's got to be when they're available and able to put the time in for us. But any content we can do around players is like yet another element to either bring in a new fan or deepen the relationship with an existing fan. Like we have some content out there right now with Brandon Nimmo, where he runs around to a bunch of elements of the ballpark that are behind the scenes. One of the first in the series was him being take a guided tour of the hydraulic system from the apple that comes up when they score a home run. So he gets a little tutorial from the engineer who runs that, which is a really crazy, unique experience. First of all, I don't know that fans think much about how that apple comes up and what the maintenance is around it. And then to watch it from the player's perspective, just adds that different element of wonder, because he's, one of our great players. He hits a lot of home runs, but he as well had never thought about how the hydraulics worked, or there's one coming up about the groundskeeper who helps keep up the grounds and the level playing field and what they do. For example, we have a concert that we have to build a new, the promoters build the stage, what happens, you know, in resodding, you know, it's kind of geeky stuff, but it's really interesting for people who care about that, and to see it from the player's perspective. That content, social content's performing really well for us right now.
Yeah. I think it's there's something quite cool in that as well, where you'll get a lot of, you know, younger kids who are on TikTok or on Instagram or on, you know, Twitter, that will look at that content and go, "Hey mom, hey dad, look at what, you know, so and so is doing," or look at what the team are getting up to before the game. There's one that I saw recently that really stood out to me, and it's something that I noticed the Brooklyn Nets done a good job at this last year as well. Seymour Wiener. The guy, the huge Mets fan, for anyone who doesn't know, you can Google his name. I'm gonna let you provide
I
the
was
context.
wondering which one you were going to bring up, because Samir, this has been a crazy year of like very meme-worthy situations for us. It did start with Seymour Wiener, who we honored on opening day. He's a 97-year-old World War II veteran, and
Insane.
it's quite common for us to honor vets and do a lot around veterans programs. But it just absolutely caught wildfire because of his name. And then also because of his approach to it, which is like, yeah, you guys, you think you're so funny. I'm 97. I've heard all the jokes before, but no joke. He was like really touched by the whole fanfare. So much so that we ended up doing a dollar dog night about a month later, that was brought to you by, endorsed by Seymour Wiener. And you know, he was like, "This is one of the biggest honors of my life." He's a super fan. He's served his country. He's, you know, talk about seeing it all, done it all.
Yeah.
And here he is, you know, an embodiment of what it means to be a Mets fan. And then following that, he'd been around a while, but not quite as visibly. This other guy, he's called the Rally Pimp, but his name is Max Wiener, no relation to Seymour.
Right.
Uh, he was doing his thing, which is wearing big fur coats, you know, big chains, wacky hair, wacky sunglasses, you know, as the team he feels needs to be rallied, the fans need to be rallied. He was, you know, out in his seats, you know, in April during a super cold day, and the opponent broadcasting team just thought that was the funniest thing, because they don't have anybody like that where they play, sidled up to him doing an interview. And to be honest, maybe because I started in the summer, I hadn't noticed him because he wears like mostly big giant fur coats. So I saw the segment on their broadcast. I was like, we gotta figure this guy out. Like, where does he come a lot? You know, because he's a legitimate fan, super fan that was just, you know, doing his own thing, watching the games, trying to get people excited. And we started, we got in touch with him. It turns out, small world, he went to college with somebody on my team.
Oh wow.
And so we got in touch, and he started doing some social content for us. And he's done a bunch of podcasts, you know, in and around Mets podcasts. And he's, you know, yet another example of the passion of fans, you know, just sort of getting behind the team, knowing that, you know, in the rough patches, like when we had some in May, the team wasn't performing very well. There were these and many others who were out there like, "We got this. We're behind you guys." And the performance started turning around. And then, you know, seemingly out of nowhere comes Grimace, which was in another entire social phenomenon. But the, you know, Grimace threw out the first pitch, and there were two other people who had also been part of the first pitch ceremony. Nobody remembers who they are. They remember Grimace, of course, because he's kind of that kind of person. But the team went on a big winning streak, and, you know, that wasn't us igniting that. That was the fans taking over. And then all of a sudden, you know, there's a rainstorm during the Subway series here, a complete like monsoon level event, and you've got him on somebody's shoulders in a Grimace-like costume, pouring down rain, you know, chugging a beer, all by the, you know, this is all fan supported.
Yeah.
And so as someone who's been at consumer brands who, aspire to that level of engagement, this stuff it just happens because you've got that level of fandom.
Must do so much for the community as well. This is regardless of your age, regardless of where you are, regardless of who you are, regardless of how often you go to watch the Mets live, seeing that content is going to put a smile on your face. It's going to make you feel a part of the community. You speak to your friends about it, you have a laugh about it. There are so many things that, almost like a bit of a domino effect. It's like one thing happens and then 5, 6 steps later there's someone's talking to their gran about it on the other side of the world, and these are things that you just can't measure, you can't take into account.
Well, I think they're hard to fabricate, and the minute you try to fabricate it, you've like lost some
Right,
of the
the
magic.
authenticity,
These
I
were
guess.
they were also completely organic, in addition to what's going on now with Jose Iglesias, who's a great baseball player on our team, but he also happens to be a singer. And when he was up to the plate, he started playing his song OMG. But then as the team started to play better, they wanted it played during the clubhouse celebration. And so that piece of it kind of took off. And then all of a sudden, we're having a little mini concert a couple of weeks ago with him performing it on the field, because our fans were like, you got to do something with
I loved
this.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was just another example of really staying tapped into the fan sentiment and where their heads are at, and when, to put a little more energy into something or when to back off and just let them do their thing with it.
Kind of shows you that not all, in fact, you'll probably tell me that most content, the best way that you communicate and that you engage with fans isn't something that's scripted, that you've foreseen for, you've had planned and in the agenda for 6 months and you've been working towards this,
Oh,
activation or
yeah.
partnership or whatever. Like it's these
Yeah.
on the fly things, events that just happen, and like I said, a domino effect kicks things into gear.
Yeah, it's, there probably are some examples of some content that folks have thought about for quite a long time and been planning for, but it's usually because of a kernel of something that they've watched happening culturally,
Right.
and the moment just hasn't been available. Like the folks who do our podcast and the folks on the social team had the idea last year to bring Grimace here, because the team wasn't playing very well. It was like, how can we bring in fun, unique kind of moments for the fan base? But because of some scheduling, timing things, it just wasn't possible then. And then fast forward to when it did become possible, it just happened to be on a night that the Mets went on a hot streak.
Yeah.
Now, you talk to the players, they're kind of like, love the Grimace stuff. Like they absolutely love it because it's amazing for the fans and it's kind of taken over, from a meme perspective. But, they've really, really figured out how to play better as a team. So it's coincidence or kismet or serendipity, like whatever word you want to use, it just took off because of all those circumstances. I don't think, had the team not gone on the hot streak, that Grimace would have been the sensation that it is.
Yeah. I completely agree. Completely agree.
Yeah,
And
but
you have to
you can't,
ride
there's
it as well,
no,
right?
like, I can't go into my laptop and like pull out the strategy document, like you were saying, that mapped all this, like, there's no way. I
Yeah.
mean, there's no way, and if we had been in a different situation from the team perspective, maybe we wouldn't have introduced that content with Brandon when we did.
Yeah.
But we did, because there are moments in time, and from a listening standpoint, whether it's here as a team or indirectly through our fans or through actual social listening, there's just so much content for us to take in. That's what informs whether we should pivot and do something now or wait. We heard from fans that they wanted better deals after the dollar dog night. So we're doing $5 Tuesdays, and they loved that. Did we think at the beginning of the year we needed to do that? No.
Yeah.
But it's going really well.
It's riding that wave, isn't it? It's capitalizing on the opportunity you have in front of you. It's being strategic about how you go about capitalizing on that and thinking, okay, what is the longer term play here? We've got to win. we've found something unique, we've found something cool. How do we now make something big of this? And that's really, in my opinion anyway, where the real kind of brain power comes into it, and the thinking, because it's on the fly. You've got to act quick. To your point earlier, baseball is one of the most hectic schedules, arguably in the world, I would actually, fathom to say. And to be able to do that and operate at the pace that you're operating at, whilst also, jumping onto these events that happen, that can create such great content, such great community, such great togetherness, is truly an art.
Yeah, it's been one of those years that, irrespective of ultimately the performance of the team on the field, that has been very unique, and just such a pleasure, and privilege to be a part of, because it's just yet another way of experiencing how deeply the fans care about what's going on here, because they've taken off with this stuff and run with it in ways that we couldn't have even conceived.
Yeah. Well, look, keep riding the wave.
Yes.
Good luck for the rest of the season. We were talking earlier, every game matters right now, and I'm rooting for the Mets. I'm looking forward to getting out to a game again soon. And look, honestly, I want to say thanks a lot from me. I've certainly learned a lot just listening to you talk through some of these very interesting topics over the past 45 minutes or so, and I'm sure a lot of people have as well. So yeah, thanks a lot for joining the podcast, Nancy. It's been a
Yeah,
pleasure.
likewise. Really happy to do it. Great conversation. Let's go Mets.
Let's go Mets. Thanks everyone for listening. We'll be back soon.